The Galactic Academy of Combat Arts sat at the edge of the Vethra Nebula, a colossal ring-shaped station that rotated slowly against a backdrop of dying stars. It was the most prestigious fighting school in 7 systems, a place where the children of warrior species came to learn the ancient forms, refine their instincts, and earn a rank that would follow them for the rest of their careers. No human had ever enrolled before Saren. She was 17 when she arrived, small by the standards of nearly every species aboard the station. At 163 centimeters and 58 kilograms, she looked, to most of the students, like something fragile that had wandered onto the wrong transport vessel. Her hair was dark and tied back in a practical knot. Her eyes were the pale gray of overcast skies. She walked with her hands loose at her sides and her chin slightly up, not arrogantly, just alert. The instructors registered her without comment. The other students watched with open curiosity and, in a few cases, something closer to amusement. Varric was one of the amused ones. He was the top-ranked student in the intermediate combat program, a fact he wore as naturally as his own skin. His species, the Drethari, were built for warfare, bipedal, 7 feet tall, with dense muscle tissue layered beneath armored subdermal plates. Their nervous system processed threat signals in milliseconds. Their bones were semi-hollow but dense as reinforced ceramite. The Drethari had been conquering things for 6,000 years and had never seen much reason to stop. Varric was not cruel by his culture's standards. He was simply confident. The kind of confident that sometimes forgets to check whether confidence is actually earned. He started small. Comments under his breath during orientation. A smile when instructors assigned Saren to the same intermediate class. He did not think the human would last a week, and he said so, quietly, to the students clustered around him. They laughed. It seemed reasonable. She was so very small. The first 3 weeks passed without incident. Saren kept to herself, mostly. She trained in the early mornings before the shared gym filled up, alone, relentless, quiet. She ate in the communal hall and watched everything. She asked questions in class that were precise and sometimes unsettled the instructors. She didn't try to make friends and didn't seem bothered by the absence of them. Varric watched her. He was a good enough fighter to recognize technique, and he could see hers was strange. Not weak, strange. Low center of gravity. Economical motion. A kind of loose readiness in her stance that reminded him of something he couldn't name. He found it irritating in a way he couldn't fully articulate. The confrontation arrived on a Thursday, during the open sparring block. The rules were simple. Students could challenge any other student of equal or lower rank. Physical contact was permitted within the training parameters. Medical bay was 2 corridors away. Instructors supervised, but did not intervene in sanctioned matches. Varric crossed the room towards Saren. She was wrapping her hands when he arrived. She looked up without particular alarm. "I'd like to see what Earth teaches," he said. His tone was polite in the way that carried its own insult inside it, the politeness of someone who expects to win so completely that courtesy costs them nothing. "Sure," Saren said. They moved to the center mat. The room shifted. Other students drifted closer. An impromptu audience assembled itself the way audiences always do when something interesting is about to happen. Varric settled into his opening form, the traditional Drethari guard, weight-centered, both arms raised, chin tucked behind the upper plate of his left forearm. It was a beautiful stance, technically. Stable, powerful, almost architecturally sound. He had been told humans were fragile. He had been told their bones broke easily. He had been told their nervous systems were slow. He had been told, in other words, exactly wrong. Varric threw the first punch. It was not a wild swing. It was a precise, measured strike aimed at Saren's collarbone, enough to stagger, to signal, to demonstrate the gap between them without actually damaging her. A teaching blow. The kind you throw when you want the lesson to be memorable. It did not land. What happened next took approximately 2.5 seconds. Later, some of the students would try to reconstruct it from memory and find that their memories disagreed on the details, not because it was unclear, but because it was too fast for narrative, which requires sequence, and what Saren did not seem to happen in sequence. She slipped inside the arc of his arm. Not backward, inside, rotating off the center line with a small pivot that put his extended limb behind her and his balance forward past the point of easy recovery. Her left hand controlled his elbow. Her right hand found his wrist. She used neither strength nor leverage in the way Varek understood those concepts. She used angle, and she used timing, and she used the 7 feet and enormous mass of him as the primary instrument of what followed. Varek went down. Not fell, went down, which is different. Falling implies accident. What happened to Varek was deliberate, geometric, and slightly educational, though he was too busy landing to appreciate the instruction in real time. He hit the mat face first with a sound like a structural event. The room was very quiet for a moment. Saren stepped back, hands loose at her sides again, chin slightly up. She wasn't breathing hard. She watched him without expression while he processed what had occurred. It took Varek several seconds to push himself upright. He was not seriously hurt, she had controlled the throw precisely enough that his fall was loud but not dangerous. Which was, in its own way, perhaps the most unsettling part. She had calibrated it. She had chosen that outcome from among other available outcomes. He got to his feet and looked at her. "That's what Earth teaches," Saren said. She said it plainly, without triumph, without performance. The way you'd answer a question that had been asked in good faith. Varek stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, very slowly, "What was that technique?" "Old one," she said. "Humans have been refining close-quarters systems for a few thousand years. We didn't have armor plating or redundant organ systems. We had to work with what we had." "Which was?" "Physics," she said. "And a lot of time to practice dying badly and learn from it." He considered this. The audience around them had not yet dispersed. 30-odd students of 7 species stood in a loose ring, and in the silence, something was shifting in the room, some recalibration happening quietly but visibly on many faces. "Show me," Varek said. Saren blinked. "The throw?" "The throw. And whatever comes before the throw." "The part where you move, how do you read the attack that fast?" She looked at him for a moment, assessing something. Then she nodded, once. "It's called negative space reading," she said, and moved back to the center of the mat. "You watch for what the body is about to stop doing, not what it's starting to do. By the time a limb moves, the decision's already 2 steps old. If you learn to read the weight shift, you're ahead. Our trainers don't teach that." "I know. I noticed in your footwork." He absorbed this without visible offense, which was, she thought, a decent sign. They worked for the rest of the block, and then past it, until an instructor came to close the gym and found them still at it, Varek attacking in increasingly precise increments, Saren dismantling each one and explaining the seam she had found, both of them entirely absorbed in what had quietly become something other than a fight. Word moved through the academy the way word always does, fast, and already changed by the time it arrives. By dinner, the story had become that the human girl had thrown the top student across the room in under 2 seconds. By the following morning, it was that she had done it without touching him, using some form of human spatial manipulation that worked by a different physics than the rest of the galaxy understood. The truth was more interesting, and simpler. She had landed in a place where no one had thought to look at her clearly, and from that place, she had waited with patient and absolute confidence. That was the thing about humans, the senior instructor would say later to a colleague over tea in the staff corridor. They didn't win by being the strongest species in the room. They won by having spent an unreasonable amount of time figuring out how to beat things that were stronger than them. It was, the instructor admitted, a fairly terrifying combination. The colleague agreed. They watched through the corridor window as Saren and Varek trained again on the empty evening mat, two figures moving in deliberate patterns, one teaching, one learning, both entirely serious. The stars burned outside. Humanity, as it had always done, was making itself at home.